Ladies and gentlemen, there is a moment in every painful relationship that no one prepares you for. The moment when the noise stops on both sides. No messages, no apologies, no explanations, just silence. And in that silence, your mind starts asking dangerous questions. Did I lose? Did they move on? Did I ever matter at all? But what if this quiet isn't a loss? What if it's a turning point? Today, we're going to talk about what really happens when a narcissist and you both go no contact. Not the surface story, but the unseen shifts, the internal battles, and the quiet power that begins to grow inside you, often without you realizing it, until everything changes. No contact is often misunderstood as quiet, as distance, as nothing happening. But in reality, it is one of the most emotionally charged spaces two people can ever occupy, especially when the relationship involved control, manipulation, and power. When no contact begins, the noise doesn't disappear. It turns inward. What looks like silence on the outside becomes a battlefield on the inside, where ego, fear, and emotional withdrawal collide. For the narcissist, silence is not rest. It is threat. Their sense of self depends on engagement, on reaction, on proof that they still matter. When the messages stop, when the arguments end, when there is no audience to perform for, the ego begins to panic. It starts asking dangerous questions. Am I losing control? Am I being replaced? Did I miscalculate? That fear doesn't show up as sadness. It shows up as agitation, resentment, and an urgent need to regain balance by any means necessary. For you, the silence hits differently. At first, it feels heavy. Your body has been trained to respond, to explain, to soothe, to fix. Without that role, there is a strange withdrawal, like stepping off a moving train and feeling the ground sway beneath your feet. Your mind replays moments, searching for meaning, closure, or reassurance, not because you want chaos, but because chaos became familiar. This is why no contact feels uncomfortable before it feels peaceful. Both sides are detoxing, but from different substances. You are withdrawing from emotional hypervigilance. The narcissist is withdrawing from supply. That difference matters because one withdrawal leads to clarity, while the other leads to desperation. This is not emptiness. This is transformation in its rawest form. Silence is not absence, it is pressure. And pressure always reveals the truth of what was really holding the relationship together. And as that pressure builds, something subtle but powerful begins to shift. Because once the noise is gone, once the reactions stop, control can no longer travel in just one direction. When both of you go no contact, the old dynamic collapses quietly, without an announcement, without a final argument to mark the end. The structure that once kept the balance tilted starts to crumble. Before, control lived in response, in who reached out first, in who explained, apologized, reassured, in who could not tolerate the discomfort of silence. And for a long time, that weight rested on you. You carried the emotional labor, the fear of losing connection, the responsibility of keeping things okay. That is why the narcissist always seemed calm while you felt anxious. They knew the silence would eventually bring you back. But when you don't return, when the silence stretches longer than expected, control loses its grip. Because control requires participation. It needs your energy, your uncertainty, your willingness to engage. Without that, it has nowhere to land. The narcissist may tell themselves they are fine, that this was their decision, they are winning by staying quiet, but internally the absence of your response creates instability. Power no longer flows from them to you. It stalls in the middle, unresolved. For you, something unexpected happens. The silence that once felt unbearable begins to feel neutral, then manageable, then steady. You start realizing that nothing terrible happens when you don't explain yourself. The world doesn't collapse when you don't chase clarity. Your worth doesn't disappear when someone refuses to see it. This is the moment control stops being something taken from you and becomes something you quietly reclaim, not through confrontation, not through proving a point, but through stillness, through the realization that your peace does not depend on being acknowledged by someone who thrived on imbalance. And that is when the dynamic truly changes, because power no longer belongs to the one who withholds. It belongs to the one who no longer needs to reach. And it's right there, in that reclaimed stillness, that an unspoken expectation begins to surface. Because even when control slips, the narcissist is convinced of one thing: that you will eventually be the one to break. That belief has been built over time, reinforced by every moment you doubted yourself, every time silence made you uncomfortable enough to reach out just to restore balance. In their mind, this is not an ending. It is a pause, a test. They are waiting, not calmly, not patiently, but with a quiet certainty shaped by past experience. They expect your emotions to rise, your anxiety to peak, your need for resolution to outweigh your resolve. This expectation gives them a false sense of security. It allows them to tolerate the silence longer than they otherwise could because they believe the outcome is already decided. You'll miss them. You'll need answers. You'll come back to explain, to soften, to reconnect. But what they don't realize is that something fundamental has changed. You are no longer reacting from fear. You are learning how to sit with discomfort without translating it into action. Each day you don't reach out, the expectation they rely on begins to erode. And this erosion is deeply unsettling because it removes the predictability they depended on to feel in control. For you, this is where strength is quietly forged, not in grand declarations or dramatic exits, but in restraint, in choosing not to relieve someone else's anxiety at the cost of your own healing. You start noticing that the urge to break silence comes in waves, and that waves always pass if you let them. This is the turning point. The moment when silence stops being something you endure and becomes something you choose. And as that expectation crumbles on their side, a new truth takes root on yours. You don't need to be understood by someone who only listened in order to control. The power no longer lies in who speaks first. It lies in who no longer needs to. And when that expectation finally weakens, when the silence stretches beyond what they thought you could tolerate, something far more destabilizing begins to happen inside the narcissist. Because beneath the confidence, beneath the performance of indifference, there is no solid sense of self to fall back on. Their identity was never built from within. It was assembled through reflection, through how others reacted, responded, admired, resisted, or chased. Without you reaching out, without your emotions confirming their significance, the structure starts to shake. This is not heartbreak in the way you experience it. It is disorientation, a loss of orientation in the emotional world. They begin to feel unseen, irrelevant, unanchored. And that is terrifying to someone whose self-image depends on constant external validation. You may never witness this collapse directly. It doesn't always show up as vulnerability. Often it appears as sudden anger, impulsive decisions, exaggerated confidence, or frantic attempts to secure attention elsewhere. New connections, dramatic stories, subtle provocations, all attempts to recreate a mirror that reflects them back into existence. But no reflection feels quite right because it isn't you. And more importantly, it isn't familiar. This internal unraveling happens because silence removes their ability to regulate their identity. When no one is there to react, there is no emotional feedback loop to stabilize their ego. The question, do I matter, becomes loud. And without an immediate answer, the mind scrambles to avoid the void. Meanwhile, the contrast on your side becomes clearer. While they search for supply, you are learning to exist without constant emotional reinforcement. Your sense of self, once eroded by walking on eggshells, begins to reassemble quietly. You notice your thoughts are your own again. Your moods are no longer dictated by someone else's approval or withdrawal. This is why the silence feels so different now. What once kept you trapped is now exposing the imbalance that always existed. Their identity collapses without reflection. Yours strengthens without it. And that difference explains everything that comes next. And as that imbalance becomes impossible to ignore, another quiet process begins to unfold. One that you may not recognize at first because it doesn't announce itself with drama. While they are scrambling to rebuild a reflection of themselves elsewhere, your body is doing something radically different. It is finally coming down from survival mode. For a long time, your nervous system was trained to stay alert, to scan tone, timing, silence, and shifts in mood. You learn to read between words, to anticipate reactions, to brace yourself for what might come next. That kind of hypervigilance becomes normal when love feels unpredictable. And when no contact begins, the body doesn't immediately trust the calm. At first, it feels like waiting for the other shoe to drop, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, Your system starts to recalibrate. Your breath deepens. Your sleep changes. Your thoughts stop racing in circles looking for danger. You realize you can move through a day without managing someone else's emotions. And in that space, clarity emerges. Not because you forced it, but because your body finally feels safe enough to think. This is where the contrast sharpens. While you are healing from overstimulation, they are agitated by deprivation. You are learning how to self-soothe. They are searching for someone to regulate them. What brings you relief brings them distress because peace offers no supply, no reaction, no reassurance of importance. It can feel unfair to realize this. You may still be grieving while they appear to be thriving, distracted, or already involved elsewhere. But appearances lie. One path leads inward, toward stability and self-trust. The other leads outward, toward urgency and dependence. This is the moment when your silence stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like protection. You are no longer enduring no contact. You are benefiting from it. And as your nervous system settles into this new baseline, something profound becomes clear. Healing does not come from being chosen again. It comes from no longer needing to be. And as your body settles into that steadier rhythm, a deeper understanding begins to surface. One that reframes everything you once thought abandonment meant. What feels like peace to you does not register as peace to them. It registers as rejection, not because you harmed them, but because your absence no longer serves their emotional needs. For you, the quiet is spacious. It gives you room to think, to feel without being rushed, to reconnect with parts of yourself that were drowned out by constant tension. You begin to enjoy small, ordinary moments again. There is no performance, no fear of saying the wrong thing, no punishment hiding behind affection. This calm may feel unfamiliar, but it is gentle. It doesn't demand anything from you. For the narcissist, that same quiet is unbearable. Without your presence to absorb their projections or soothe their insecurities, the silence becomes a reminder of something they cannot tolerate, their dependence. They experience your absence not as a neutral boundary, but as abandonment, because they equate being needed with being valued. When that need disappears, so does their sense of worth. This is why they may rewrite the story. They tell themselves you were cold, unfair, cruel. They frame your self-preservation as punishment, because accepting your peace would require them to face their own emptiness, and that is something they are not equipped to do. You may still feel a pull of guilt here, a reflex to soften the silence, to reassure, to explain that you didn't mean harm. But notice the difference now. Your peace does not come from hurting them. It comes from finally choosing yourself. And choosing yourself does not require permission. This is the painful truth of growth. When you stop abandoning yourself, someone who depended on that abandonment will feel left behind. Not because you failed them, but because the dynamic no longer benefits them. And in that realization, the last threads of confusion begin to loosen. What you once feared was loneliness reveals itself as freedom, and what they experience as loss is simply the absence of control they once relied on. And it's here, in that quiet freedom, that many people expect something dramatic to happen. A message, a confrontation, a sudden moment that proves the power has shifted. But that moment rarely comes in a form you can point to. Because the real shift doesn't announce itself. It settles in silently. The change happens not when they reach out, but when you realize you're no longer waiting for them to. You notice that hours pass without checking your phone. Days move forward without rehearsing conversations in your head. Your emotions stop rising and falling based on whether someone acknowledges you. And that is when the balance finally equalizes, then tips. For so long, power looked like intensity, like being wanted, chased, fought over. It looked like having the ability to provoke a reaction. But real power is quieter than that. It lives in self-containment, in not needing to prove anything, in not needing to be seen by someone who only recognized you when you were useful. They may still believe they are in control because nothing has been said, because silence feels neutral to them on the surface. But underneath, they are aware of something unsettling. You are no longer oriented toward them. You are no longer circling back emotionally or mentally. And that loss of orientation is what truly destabilizes them. For you, this is the moment life starts to feel real again. Not perfect, not free from grief, but grounded. You respond to your own needs instead of reacting to someone else's absence. You make choices based on what nourishes you, not on what might restore connection. The power shift happens when you stop measuring your worth by whether someone notices your absence, when silence no longer feels like a test you must pass, when you realize that your peace is not fragile, it's sustainable. This is the kind of strength that cannot be taken away because it doesn't rely on silence or attention or control. It comes from alignment. And once you feel it, you understand something essential. The dynamic didn't end when contact stopped. It ended when you stopped reaching for what was hurting you. And once that alignment settles in, something unexpected can happen. The calm you worked so hard to reach can start to feel underwhelming, not painful, not wrong, just quiet in a way that feels almost too still. After years of emotional intensity, this new steadiness can feel strangely empty, even boring, and that can be confusing because you assume healing should feel exciting, empowering, or dramatic. But the truth is, chaos trains the nervous system to equate intensity with aliveness. When love was unpredictable, every high felt earned, and every low felt consuming. Your body learned to stay activated, to interpret emotional spikes as meaning. So when the spikes disappear, the absence can feel like something is missing, even when nothing is wrong. This is where many people misinterpret healing. They mistake peace for apathy. They think if it doesn't hurt, it must not matter. But boredom is not a sign of loss. It's a sign that your system is no longer addicted to adrenaline. You are no longer living in reaction mode. You are present. Meanwhile, this same calm would be intolerable for the narcissist. Without drama, there is no stimulation. Without emotional charge, there is no sense of importance. That is why they often chase intensity elsewhere, mistaking chaos for connection. For them, boredom feels like emptiness. For you, it is restoration. This phase requires patience. You are relearning how to experience joy without turbulence, how to feel content without needing to earn it, how to exist without constant emotional negotiation. It may feel unfamiliar, but unfamiliar does not mean unsafe. If you stay here, if you don't run back to what once kept you activated, something beautiful begins to happen. Your baseline shifts. You start finding meaning in simple moments. Your laughter becomes softer but more genuine. Your peace becomes less fragile. Healing doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like stability. And once your body learns that stability is safe, you will never crave chaos again, no matter how familiar it once felt. And as that stability becomes your new normal, clarity sharpens in a way it never could when you were emotionally flooded. You begin to see the relationship without distortion, without the longing that once softened the truth. And one realization rises above the rest. Quiet but undeniable, what they mourn is not the loss of you as a person, but the loss of access to what you provided. They don't miss your laughter in the way you shared it freely. They miss how it made them feel powerful. They don't miss your empathy as something sacred. They miss how it absorbed their volatility. They don't miss your presence for its warmth. They miss the regulation, the reassurance, the reflection you offered without asking for anything in return. This understanding can sting at first. It asks you to grieve not only the relationship, but the fantasy that you were loved in the way you loved. But there is also freedom here. Because once you see that the attachment was transactional, you stop personalizing their absence. Their silence is no longer a statement about your worth. It is a consequence of lost supply. This is why attempts to re-enter your life when they happen often feel hollow. The words may sound familiar, even convincing, but something in you doesn't respond the same way. Your body no longer lights up at the promise of recognition. You sense the hunger beneath the affection. And for the first time, you don't confuse that hunger with love. You are no longer auditioning for connection. You are observing it. And observation creates distance, enough to choose wisely. They may cycle through emotions you never see. Anger, nostalgia, resentment, curiosity. But beneath all of it is the same ache, the loss of someone who made their inner world easier to manage. That ache is not your responsibility. This realization marks a turning point. You stop waiting for them to miss you in the way you deserved. And in that letting go, you reclaim something priceless, the right to be loved without being used. And with that truth fully in view, the final shift happens, not loudly, not suddenly, but with a firmness that no longer wavers. This is the moment your self-worth stops negotiating. You no longer measure your value by whether someone has out, apologizes, or finally understands what they lost. You stop waiting for recognition to validate your pain or your growth. Something inside you settles, and it doesn't need external confirmation anymore. Before, part of you kept a quiet bargain in the background. If they change, then it meant you mattered. If they miss you, then the hurt was real. If they come back differently, then the story ends with meaning. But now you see that your worth was never meant to be proven through someone else's realization. It exists independently of their awareness. This is where boundaries stop feeling like effort. You are no longer holding the line out of fear or discipline. You hold it because crossing it would cost you something you refuse to lose: your peace, your clarity, your self-respect. And once self-worth reaches this place, it becomes non-negotiable. You may still feel moments of sadness. Healing does not erase memory, but sadness no longer confuses you. It doesn't pull you backward. It passes through without convincing you to abandon yourself again. What once felt like silence now feels like alignment. What once felt like rejection now feels like protection. You are not proving strength by staying away. You are honoring truth by not returning to what required you to shrink. This is what happens next when both of you go no contact. Not victory, not revenge, not validation, but something far more enduring. You become someone who no longer trades dignity for connection, someone who understands that love should expand you, not consume you. And when your self-worth reaches this place, there is no going back, because you are no longer asking to be chosen. You are choosing yourself, and that choice changes everything. And now, as this journey comes full circle, there is one final truth to sit with, one that ties every moment of silence, every wave of doubt, and every step of healing together. No contact was never about punishment. It was never about winning. It was about remembering who you are when you are no longer being pulled apart by someone else's needs. What you survived was not just a relationship. It was a slow erosion of self. And what you rebuilt in the quiet was not just peace, but identity. You learned that love without safety is not love, that intensity without respect is not passion, and that silence, when chosen consciously, can be the loudest declaration of self-respect a person can make. If you are still in this space, still feeling the pull, still wondering if they will return, understand this: the most important return already happened. You came back to yourself. You stopped chasing clarity from someone who thrived on confusion. You stopped waiting for closure from someone who avoided accountability. And in doing so, you broke a cycle that may have existed long before you ever entered their life. This is not the end of your story. It is the moment the story becomes yours again. From here on, you choose connection that feels steady, not consuming. You choose peace that doesn't require explanation. You choose relationships where silence isn't used as a weapon, and love doesn't feel like something you have to earn. Stay here. Stay grounded in what you've learned. Because the version of you who can sit in silence without abandoning themselves is not someone easily shaken again. And if there is one thing to carry forward, let it be this: when you stop begging for love and start living in alignment, the right people don't disappear. They recognize you. And that recognition, real, mutual, and safe, is what you were always worthy of.